Hello everyone, this is Stephen Balch, your instructor for Introduction to Macroeconomics at Ozarka College. What I'd like to do today is go over the correct answers for problem 20.1 on page 371 in the textbook. That was part of the chapters 19 through 20 assignment that I recently graded. I noticed that several of you didn't get the correct answers for that problem. So I'm going to go over each one of the correct answers with you very quickly here. So the first one, the first calculation that you needed to do was merchandise trade balance, which I gave you the actual formula for each one of these on the assignment instructions. But merchandise trade balance, if you'll remember, is the merchandise export value minus the merchandise imports value. So in this case, in the example that was given in the problem in the textbook, that would be 455 billion minus 3,152.5 billion, which would give you a value of $2,697.5 billion. Of course, it gave you all the numbers in billions of dollars. Some of them are actually trillions because they're 4-digit numbers, but we're just basically making everything into standard amount, so they're all in billions. So the correct answer for merchandise trade balance is, again, a negative 2,697.5 billion. Okay. On the next one, it was the balance on goods and services. It wanted you to calculate that, and the formula, as I showed on the instructions, is merchandise trade balance plus, and then in parentheses, because you got to do this part first, service exports minus service imports. Okay, so the way that the numbers that would be in that formula would be the 2697.5 that we just calculated for merchandise trade balance minus, and then in parentheses, which means you do this part first, would be 2788.5 minus 221. So that would give you a value once you do that part of the formula that's in the parentheses, which is what you do first. Then it would be 2697.5 minus 2567.5, which would give you a value of negative 130 billion. Okay, and of course, when you have a balance that is a negative number, that's basically a deficit. Okay, so we have a deficit of $130 billion. All right, then the next calculation it wanted you to do was balance on current account, which, if you look at the formula that I gave you, that's the balance on goods and services, which is what we just calculated, plus net income and net transfers. Okay, so this is very simple. You would basically take the minus 130 billion that we just calculated for the balance on goods and services, and then add the net income and net transfers, which was 287.95 billion. So you would get a value of on the calculation of $157.95 billion. That is a positive number. Okay. All right. And then the next calculation was financial account balance. And this is calculated by taking the change in foreign-owned assets in the United States minus the change in U.S.-owned assets abroad. Okay? And it gave you both of those values in the table as part of the question. So it's very simple. You just take the $130 billion, which is your foreign-owned assets in the U.S., minus the $318.5 billion, which is the change in U.S.-owned assets abroad. And then we end up with a value of negative $188.5 billion. Okay? Now, I noticed that there were several of you that forgot or maybe didn't do the calculation correct, and you got a positive value rather than a negative value on some of these calculated values. You have to make sure that you're plugging in the numbers there correctly and paying attention to whether it's a positive number or a negative number. There's a big difference between negative 188 billion and positive 188 billion. So you have to make sure that you're doing the calculations correctly, okay? And making sure they're correct. All right. And then the last value that it wanted you to get was statistical discrepancy, which is the balance on current account plus the financial account balance. All right? And so that would be $157.95 billion, which was the balance on current account that we calculated previously, minus $188.5 billion, which was the calculation that I just showed you. And so you end up with a value of negative $30.55 billion. Okay? Again, some of you ended up with basically the right numerical value as far as the numbers, but you forgot to put the minus sign there. That is very important. There's a big difference between a negative number and a positive number when we're doing these calculations. So you have to make sure that you're paying attention to that. Okay? But anyway, those are the correct answers. That's how you would calculate those. So you may want to look at that. Those of you that had problems figuring out what the what the calculated values should have been. And so just let me know if you have questions about that, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you.